New cruising changes could cost you hundreds of dollars if you don't know. A friend of mine learned this the hard way on his last cruise. From new age restrictions to drink limits to never seen before government restrictions. These are 7 major changes every cruiser must know before their next cruise. I'm Gary with Optimal Cruising, bringing you fresh cruise advice, money-saving hacks, and secret strategies the cruise lines don't advertise. Now let's get started. The first cruise I went on was on Carnival, and I was 21 years old. Can't do that anymore with the Carnival new age requirement of 25 in order to book a cruise. That is if you're traveling by yourself or with a partner who is also under 25. Now, if you're traveling with somebody older, they can book the cruise and you can travel with them. But you cannot book a cruise for yourself or you and a friend or you and a partner if you are all under 25. This is a new change and it could be trend setting as we typically see these types of changes filter out through the industry. But it starts with Carnival, and keep that in mind if you're booking a cruise. And that's not the only change Carnival is leading the way with. One of my favorite things to bring on a cruise is my Bluetooth speaker. But now Carnival says no. In fact, Carnival has banned Bluetooth speakers outright. Other lines may follow. Their restrictions are getting tougher on these things. And there's other items that are newly being banned as well. Some more obscure ones like a clack fan that Carnival has banned. There are other items like multi-plugs that are extension cords that basically extend the number of outlets that you can plug in. Most cruise lines have now banned these. We're not just talking about surge protectors, we're talking about any plug that extends the number of outlets, with one exception. And this is important to know because the reason we need outlets these days is for our charging devices. Cruise lines are still allowing you to bring a plug that converts into 4 or 8 USB ports as long as it doesn't have additional outlets. Things like Starlink devices and routers to get internet access are no longer allowed. And things that have been banned for some time, like hard alcohol and CBD products, are now being enforced to a higher degree. So keep that in mind, because in some cases, these things are not only being confiscated, but people are actually being denied boarding or have been kicked off the ship at a port of call because they were found to have one of those banned items in their possession that cruise lines are starting to take more seriously. And there is a growing trend among cruise lines to ban wheelchairs for passengers who do not book accessible cabins. So check with your cruise line policy if you're booking a cruise in the next year or two, because cruise lines are saying that too many passengers book standard cabins and then bring on wheelchairs, and they are starting to disallow this. If you need a wheelchair, they're saying you have to book an accessible cabin so that they know how many passengers and they limit how many passengers on board actually have these wheelchairs. But cruise lines are not only telling you more and more what you can't pack, they're now telling you what you can't drink. When I first started cruising, if you had an all-inclusive drink package, it really meant all-inclusive. It didn't matter what you ordered, how many you ordered, you could keep them coming. But that's not the case anymore. Cruise lines have been slowly narrowing the scope of their drink package and putting limits on daily number of drinks. Now, MSC is one of the more recent ones to do this with their drink package, and they put a limit of 15 drinks per day. Carnival has the same limit, so does Princess. Royal Caribbean and Norwegian haven't really followed suit yet, but it's something to look out for. If you're buying that drink package, just be aware there is an actual limit. It is not truly an unlimited drink package. Now, the drink limits really won't affect most cruise passengers as individuals, but it does cut down on a common practice that people used to do, which is if you're traveling with another couple, say, and one room buys the drink package and the other cabin doesn't, and you just kind of share, that eats away at the cruise line's profits, obviously, and so these limits are designed to cut down on that. That's, in fact, why if you buy a drink package on a cruise and you have your spouse or significant other in the same cabin as you, they are going to be forced to buy that package too, so that you can't just buy one package and share. And while Royal Caribbean hasn't put a hard limit on their drink package yet, there is something else they're doing to restrict what you can drink. When I go on a cruise, my wife likes to take a beer or two back to the cabin and keep it in the cabin refrigerator and enjoy it at some point later on. But Royal Caribbean says no more. In fact, they have a policy now where anything you buy alcohol-wise at a bar, the bartender has to open for you. You cannot leave that venue unless the drink has been opened. So you can't take bottles or cans of beer back to your room to enjoy later. And I think this is mostly intended for drink package purchasers, because I'm guessing people take a number of these back to their cabin and maybe take them home, or I'm not exactly sure, but they're cutting down on this, and it's something to be aware of, because it used to be you could pretty much do whatever you want. You pay for a beer, or you have a beer on a drink package, and you can take that can or bottle and take it off the ship if you wanted to. But not anymore. At this point, they don't allow this. Now, we were on a recent MSC cruise, and they had no problem with this. We took cans of Guinness back to the room, and no big deal. So this is a new thing with Royal Caribbean, and who knows if it's going to spread. Now, if you think that's restrictive, wait until you hear what's happening at the ports themselves. But first, I want to know if you think these changes by the cruise lines are petty or reasonable. Put it in the comments below. Okay, we're going to get to the port changes in just a second, but I want to cover this one quickly because it's kind of a pet peeve of mine to be sitting in my room when I happen to have a balcony cabin and smell that smoke coming through the window from the guy next door or a few cabins down. Yes, happens all the time. There's still a lot of cruisers that get out in their balcony and start smoking. But beware that cruise lines are cracking down on this, and there's been several reports just this year where passengers have been fined for smoking when it used to be they'd get a knock on the door and a couple warnings. In some cases, cruise lines are just coming straight out with a fine. So be careful. There are plenty of smoking areas throughout the ship on all major cruise lines. It's just not appropriate to do it in your cabin or even on your balcony, and cruise lines are cracking down. When I was younger, you never thought it was a problem to go to Jamaica, Cozumel, any of these type of tropical places. But that is changing. And in fact, in the past year, the U.S. State Department has issued warnings for travelers to Haiti, Jamaica, Cozumel, Belize, and a host of other places. It's important to keep up on this because it can impact what you do at these ports of call. It used to be easy to just do excursions on your own, but now the government's saying it's becoming a little bit more dangerous. And if you don't want to be taken advantage of, there's a lot of scams going on. We have other videos about those scams to be aware of. Your best bet is to book an excursion with a professional company. We actually have some links to those in our description, or directly with the cruise line In both cases, you'll be safe, but it's becoming more and more iffy to do some things on your own at these ports of call. And then if you are booking a cruise to a European port, more and more European ports are actually experiencing protests from locals against cruisers. And some of these ports are limiting the number of cruise ships and cruisers that can be there a day. So there's all these cruises planned for the next 12 months, 24 months, and they're not all going to be able to make all of their ports. So keep that in mind. If you're booking a cruise out into the future, you may not hit all the ports that it's advertising, because cruise lines are going to have to adjust their schedules to accommodate with these changes and more restrictions on the number of passengers being allowed at many European ports. And then there's increased fees that just happened. So as of July, Mexico is now charging $42 per passenger for all cruise ships at their ports of call. This means an increase in prices for you, and it could mean itinerary changes for cruises that were booked in advance where the cruise line doesn't want to fork over that extra money and they'll go somewhere else or maybe spend an extra day in their private island. It's hard to know what's going to happen. If you've booked a cruise to a more exotic location, somewhere in Indonesia, Australia, there's a possibility that at some point that cruise could be canceled, because cruise lines are canceling some of these cruises that are less populated, when they're not filling up ships, and they're moving those ships to the Caribbean and other areas where ships are getting fully booked. And so if you book an exotic cruise well out into the future, there's a small chance yours could be one of those that gets reshuffled and they end up just canceling that cruise. You get your money back, but it's still kind of a headache when you're planning on something and now you have to redo those plans. And another hot spot in the world right now is the Suez Canal. So a lot of people book this, which is kind of an exotic cruise to pass through the Suez. Or if you're doing a repositioning cruise from Asia to Europe or Europe to Asia, that's typically the route cruise lines would take. But right now they're not doing that because of what's going on in the area, and they're going to have to take different routes to move those ships around. So keep that in mind, because it will impact itineraries on those types of cruises. Unfortunately, that's not the only thing that's becoming more unfriendly to cruise travelers. But before we get to this next item, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel and get all of our cruising updates. Last year, I was told that this year, any cruise I did in Europe was going to require some type of additional visa. And that was never the case before. Any American could travel to Europe for up to 3 months and not have a visa of any kind. But that is changing, and it's changed also for passengers from Europe coming to America. Well, the European Union is doing the same thing now. They're going to have an electronic visa that you have to purchase before you go to Europe. Now, it was supposed to already be in effect, but there have been some delays. So this is a fluid subject that you really need to keep an eye on if you're booking a cruise outside of North America, because when this change happens is still not 100% certain. And if your cruise is before that date, there's nothing you need to do. But once this gets implemented, you will need to purchase online an electronic visa to travel to Europe to do a European cruise before you actually leave. And it's going to have a cost to it. It's somewhere around $15 to $20. It's not very expensive, but it is an additional cost, and it's something that will be a required travel document. So make sure you have it if you're going to need it, or you'll be denied boarding, and you won't only be out the fee of the visa, you will be out the cost of your cruise. So now that you're up to date with some of the biggest changes in the cruising industry, there are 7 ripoffs happening right now on cruise ships. I'll tell you all about those right here.